Why do we struggle when we're making masculine cards? The other day, Gerry and I were talking about different strategies we can use to solve that mystery, and I think it's because we're trying to make something we wouldn't necessarily make for ourselves. Most of us are women making cards mostly for women, and when we have to make cards for men, we think we have to add golf or fishing or cars or something specifically traditionally masculine, and it's just not what we're used to working with. But what if we could just use the things we love to make these cards? Rainbows? Flowers? Pink? Let's give it a try. I'm going to start with pink and try to create a card with a kind of madras plaid look. I've got my mini make art station, but really all I want is a grid to help me with spacing and straight lines on my 4-inch white panel, so any smooth surface will do. I'm going to use a piece of acetate as my mask to help with some ink blending, and I line it up at 1 inch and then blend some Sauna ink over the edge. I'm using a small blending brush from Altenew, but you can use whatever you're comfortable with. I'm putting more pressure down along the edge of the acetate and less as I move further away, and that will give me a nice fade. Then I turn the surface and I move my mask so that I can do the other side. I'm going to continue like this until I have my panel completely filled with color, and you can see that this is going to give me a grid of ink blended squares. My next color is Sparkling Berry, which is one of the newest shades from Catherine Pooler, and I'm doing the same thing, masking an edge and blending the color over it, letting it fade before it runs into the yellow. I clean the acetate in between colors. I want the blending to be on the cardstock and not contaminated on the mask, if you know what I mean. This color is a nice bright pink, but it is part of Catherine's Spa collection. Catherine's inks come in 2 main categories: Party, which are super bright, vibrant, and saturated, and Spa, which are a little more muted. These colors are rich and perfect for autumn cards, and also for masculine cards, and there's a full rainbow of them available. After Sparkling Berry, I use Stone Blue, and finally I'm using Juniper Mist, which is a deep navy blue. I don't need the acetate at this point, and I do want a contrast between the lighter stone blue and this navy, so I'm going in with quite a heavy hand, and I'm layering it up quite a bit as well. I love geometrics for all my card making, and simple shapes like the squares I've made here work really well for masculine cards. To add some texture, I'm going to also add some more geometry with this angled mosaic embossing folder from Altenew. I place my panel so that the pattern will be lined up with my grid or plaid pattern, and I run it through my die cutting machine. And when it comes out, check out that texture. The depth of the embossing gives the look of shading within my plaid pattern, and it really adds a ton of visual interest. Another thing that works well for masculine cards is to just have a gorgeous background and a big die cut sentiment. I bought this Lawn Fawn Giant Happy Birthday to You because it fills up space, which is great for making quick cards. But this time, I really don't want to cover up my background so much, so I'm going to trim the 2U off before I offset it with the navy die cut behind it. This die cut is cut from some textured silver cardstock I had in my stash. Again, that texture adds some subtle interest without distracting from my background. When I have them all layered up, I used liquid glue on the back to adhere it to my card base. The B and the I from birthday were attached to the 2U portion of the die cut, so you just need to keep track of them and put them back in place separately. Next, I'm going to make a rainbow card inspired by this cozy looking sweater. I'm going to create my background with a gel plate. If you don't have one, ink blending will work just as well. I just find the gel plate faster and less demanding. I get a sense of how much of the gel plate I'll be using, and then I start putting down a line of peppermint scrub ink, which is another Spa collection color. I use this little Tim Holtz brayer to spread it around just a little bit before putting my cardstock down right in the corner. Then I move on to Mandarin Spice, which is a deep orange. I'm using the mini ink pads this time, and I often do it like this, one color at a time, so I'm not contaminating my ink pads. Now, I actually like to get a lot of texture on my cards when I'm using my gel plate, but the more layers you use, the smoother it will be when it all dries. I did 2 runs of Sauna, and now I'm using Skylight, which is a blue-green, since my rainbow is only going to have 5 colors. Notice that I've still got lots of texture on this panel. Now, to add some more interest to this, I'm going to use a stencil with the same inks to get a tone-on-tone look. Notice that I put my yellow down and then I went back to the orange, and that's just so I won't get orange ink from the plate onto my yellow ink pad. Once I've got all my colors down, I use a wider brayer to spread them out, and I blend them a bit, and then I place the So Curvy stencil from Catherine Pooler Designs on top. Next goes my rainbow panel, making sure to get it in the same order, and I use my hands to press that panel into the plate through the stencil to get the pattern onto my cardstock. When I remove the stencil, the ink that was trapped under it is still on the plate, and that's good to make another print, called a ghost print. This ghost print turned out to be my card saver in the end, so I'm really glad I made it. I've trimmed the panel to create a square with a negative frame by using Hutson Essential Squares dies, and I've created a card base from craft cardstock, which is another surefire way to tone down the color for a more masculine look. I used my Misty and some sentiments from a couple of Essentials by Ellen sets to create my happy birthday sentiment, and even with years of practice, I managed to move my cardstock and get a really bad stamped impression, and that's where my card saver panel came into play. I used the circle die to cut out the bad stamping, then I used the panel to find that same area on the ghost print. It took me a second to remember that the ghost print is actually the negative of the other panel, but I did get it lined up. And then I taped the die in the hole and I ran it through my die cutting machine before stamping the sentiment and popping it up on the card. I felt like the card needed something more, and even though we often think we shouldn't be adding jewels or glitter to masculine cards, I remembered that I just got these new espresso jewels from Pink Fresh Studio. They're a deep dark brown with orange and purple iridescence on them, and they are gorgeous. I chose 3 of the smaller sizes and glued them to my card. Now, as you're looking at the finished card, remember how rough that first layer was. Adding another layer of ink and the drying time have really smoothed this out, and you can see why I think that a gel plate is a great hack for people who struggle with ink blending. My final card is inspired by a crisp navy blue suit with a white shirt and a floral tie. I'm starting with the tie by putting down some of the sparkling berry ink onto my gel plate to create pink cardstock. You could ink blend the ink onto the strip or even swipe the ink pad onto the paper. Those will give very similar results. Next, I blended some of the Sauna ink in patches over my pink strip, and the blend gives me a mix of pink and orange. Before embossing, I poured clear embossing powder over the whole thing to make sure that it was perfectly dry. And then I grabbed a little flower stamp from a new Ellen Hutson stamp set, and I stamped it randomly over my strip with sticky embossing ink, making sure to leave some spaces. This time when I pour the embossing powder over, it sticks to that stamping, and then I put the strip in my foil-lined shoebox lid and I heated it with my heat gun until it was melted and shiny. Using the lid means that I wasn't trying to hold on to the strip and getting my fingers burnt. That pink and orange ink is trapped under the embossing, and I can use the navy blue ink over the strip, and that will give me pretty flowers on a dark background. I went over it a few times to get really good coverage, and when I was finished, I wiped off any navy ink that was sitting on top of the embossing to reveal the pretty florals. I blended the navy ink onto a white panel, leaving the top inch or so white, and now I'm going to add some geometric texture to the navy area by using a slimline die from Crafty Meraki. It's 3.5 inches wide, so it's perfect for fitting on this portion of my panel. I did take care to cut the finished borders off the 3 sides so it doesn't look like I'm using a partial die cut, if you know what I mean. I used liquid glue on the narrow stripes of the plaid and I glued it to the bottom portion of the panel, then put the flowers on top. Next, I got out my Misty again for a stamped sentiment. Often I tend to use block text sentiments for masculine cards, but I think this script is sophisticated and it works well. Finally, I took a Posca paint pen in white, and I filled in the flower centers with white dots, as well as scattering little white dots across the navy background. At the end of the day, I don't think good design has a gender, and these cards work for men and also for women. So maybe we don't need to struggle after all. Mystery solved. Or is it? Use this link here to head to Gerry's channel to see her thoughts on making masculine cards. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.